Good
I
morning.
think we're nailing it so far.
Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna sit down and have a conversation that, and I want it to be a little bit more like a conversation, a little less like this formal interview that everyone's used to having. But I want to, first of all, let you all know we are taking the recording from this. We're gonna cut this up a little bit, and you'll see some of it on Monday morning on our morning show called Rising with Crystal Ball and Buck Sexton. I will be on and we'll show some of this interview on the Hill.tv Rising, so please check it out on Monday. So we discovered something backstage that is kind of, I think, fun.
Yeah.
Your child is named True,
Yeah.
and he's what, almost 5 months? Almost 5 years?
Almost 5 years, yeah.
Yeah, so mine's almost 5 months. His name is Truth.
Yeah.
Which is not a typical name.
I think folks of our generation, nobody is naming their kid Peter.
Yeah, but you know who did name their kid? And I don't know if it pissed you off as much as it did me, but apparently one of the Kardashians named their daughter True.
Yeah, well, I mean, I saw that and I was like, that's a boy's name. I don't understand.
Exactly.
Kidding. Just kidding. I've actually tried to make a rule that I never in any way poke fun at unconventional names because my wife and I named a little boy True.
Right.
So we have no room to do that.
And we probably shouldn't spend a lot of time on the Kardashians, although apparently being a Kardashian helps in a lot of different ways in public policy these days that no one would have predicted 10 years
Access
ago.
thing, yeah.
So I think the second thing I think we should talk about, just to get it on the table and out of the way, is you have apparently decided not to run for president.
Yeah, well, I'm running for mayor in my hometown, Kansas City.
All right, yeah. Kansas City. And what made you decide to run for mayor?
Kansas City is a place that has made a ton of progress over the last several years. So my friend Sly James is the mayor, and under his leadership, great things have happened. And now the question is, are we going to continue that progress, and are we going to make sure it touches every part of our city? And my family first came to Kansas City in the 1880s. My wife and I are raising a sixth generation Kansas Citian, and I care a lot about it. And I just felt like that was the best place for me to serve.
Yeah. So we just heard all these statistics about what's happening in the country, how things are separating in terms of there's a geographic divide, there's demographic divides. 78% of the investment happening in America is happening in three states: California, New York, Massachusetts. What happens in a place like Kansas City in terms of innovation, entrepreneurship, and this opportunity agenda that's on the table today?
Well, I think a lot of it, when you talk about, for instance, the entrepreneurship part of it and the innovation part, is we're working very hard to be the city for entrepreneurs. And we've done some great things to make that happen, and I want to continue that. But I remind everybody that part of that is about recognizing that the term entrepreneur can't be synonymous with tech. Like, we can't fall into this trap where we think if you don't create the new app, if you don't create the new platform, then you're not an entrepreneur. I mean, folks who employ 10 people get up every day with 10 families counting on them, and they got to be pretty dang entrepreneurial just to keep that going. And so we have to make sure that we're remembering those folks, and at the same time thinking about the people who, if they have an idea for a business, I always talk about the difference between Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 500 ideas, and that we have to cultivate each equally and recruit each equally. That if people have an idea for a business, can employ a couple of people in a part of town in particular that needs employment, then the city has got to have their back. And while it is really important that we are recruiting big employers to come, it's equally important that we're focusing on homegrown businesses, because those are the ones that are most likely to stick around and not take what as a Royals fan my entire life, who went through the years when the Royals were like they are this year, were very bad, and it was all about free agency. I think about business recruitment in terms of free agency. Like, you can bring somebody in under a huge incentive, but you're going to have to re-incentivize them at some point, right? Whereas if you bring somebody up through your own farm system, so to speak, it's always better when the CEO of the company and the CEO's administrative assistant, they both send their kid to the same school, or their kid's on the same Little League team. That makes it home. It's much more likely they're going to invest in your community.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Detroit mostly, and One of the things we saw there, even a couple of decades ago, is that it was really hard to entice companies to move to Michigan. It's hard because the weather is rough. It's really one of the main reasons I don't live there, because who needs to have 6 months of winter? But the weather is rough. There are all kind of questions about schools and poverty and all these things that are taking place. But one of the things we discovered is that if you can keep kids who are coming out of schools, there it was University of Michigan, Michigan State, Eastern Wayne State. If you can keep kids when they graduate from ever leaving and help them invest, help them find a place to live and live the life they want where they are, you can actually have a much bigger economic impact, not worry about stealing jobs from other places. You can grow them at home. Mayor Duggan is starting to do that. How's Kansas City doing when it's thinking about the resource you have of people today?
We are getting much better at it, and we have room to improve. A lot of it is, there's been a big concentration on density downtown, for instance. And so a lot of that has made it very attractive. And then as we improve at that, the next part is making sure that as Kansas City becomes this place that people, in many cases, want to move to, which is exciting, that it also is a place that allows the people who have been there for quite a while and have been waiting to reap the rewards as well. I met a woman the other day who's living in Beacon Hill, which is a neighborhood that has had a lot of change and a lot of improvement. And she said, look, it's great. I love the fact that there are people who want to come across the state line, for instance, and they want to live in this neighborhood that my family's been in for generations. But then she sort of trails off a little, and she says, but also I'm kind of worried that as property values go up, I don't know that I'm going to be able to keep my family here. And that's sort of tragic. We have to make sure, and that's a blind spot that I think a lot of cities miss as they grow. We just got this presentation about what people want across the country, and I feel like from I'm a Democrat and an active one and a proud one, and one of the things that I think about with this stuff is I think voters want basically 4 things for their family in this country. I think, and this is certainly true in Kansas City, they want their family to be happy, to be healthy, to be safe, and to be nearby. And I think on those first 3, with varying degrees of success, our party has spoken to those issues. Sometimes well, sometimes really well, sometimes just okay. But we've kind of whiffed on that last one.
Yeah, let's talk about nearby. Yeah. Why is that important?
Well, because, first of all, I think it's great that this conference is not in D.C. Nothing against D.C. At all, but it is a good thing to get outside. I'm sure a lot of people here may be getting on flights to go back there. That's okay. It's a good thing to get outside of D.C. and to see what the nation's mood is, as it says here. And what you'll find are that when people are told, hey, it's no big deal, things are changing, but here's a retraining program. After a while you say that over and over again to people, and what they hear is, okay, so I need to be retrained, but you don't, right? So I'm charity. And the truth is, as you look at the changing economy, we're all going to have to learn more skills. And when you think about it that way, and when you talk about it that way, it definitely helps remove that stigma, which is important, because when people, and I'm going on about this for a second, I apologize, but when people characterize the party and the disconnect from, say, the middle of the country, too often I think what they focus on is the idea of liberal or moderate. I'm a liberal, I'm a progressive, absolutely. And I don't think that the disconnect is that folks on the coast talk in a way that's more progressive. I think the disconnect is that if you are from New York, or you're from San Francisco, or you're from LA or wherever, you're just a little less likely, and it's not your fault, you're a little less likely to think about the fact that in Kansas City, we're really worried about the fact that when our kids are successful, they often tend to go to where you live. And you don't think about that necessarily because there's a lot of opportunity, there's an excess maybe of opportunity, like from our perspective, on the coast. And so they're just less worried about people's kids leaving. My point is, you mentioned True, he's almost 5. He has no idea that if he goes away to college, he's gonna have the problem of, I'm gonna wanna go with him, know? And but I don't want him to leave, know? And so that's what all of this, I think, is about, is that, you turn on the TV and you see these stories of success, and about places like the east side of Kansas City, those success stories are often stories of escape. And what I want to change, what I think people in Kansas City and across the middle of the country want to change is we don't want the success stories to be escape stories. We want the stories of success to be somebody was successful where they were planted, where they grew up, and it made other people that are successful too.
So Donald Trump got inaugurated January 20th of 2017, and in that speech, he spent a fair bit of time talking about American carnage. And a bunch of people who were on TV, I'll include myself in that, thought like, oh wow, it's tenure and America's not having carnage or whatever. But if you go to places, in a lot of places around the country, we saw some of these slides about what's happening. We see that job growth is happening in a minority, like I think it's like 75% of jobs that are being created in 40% of the zip codes in the country. That means 60% of the zip codes in the country are only getting 25% of the jobs, 1 out of 4. Is Donald Trump right?
No, like as a general rule. But here's what I think happened here. What I don't think happened in 2016, well, first of all, I think we have to start by remembering that 54% of the country voted for somebody not named Donald Trump. I just always like to remember that.
It's healthy, it like makes you
get
up in the morning without crying.
Right, because otherwise like you turn on the TV every day. Like if the conversation you're having with your friends is how long is this guy gonna still be in office, then every morning when you wake up and you check your phone and he's still president, it's November 9th of 2016 all over again. Right. And you can't put yourself through that. It's important to remember that he didn't win the argument about who America is or where we're going. And I say that to say that when he was talking, I don't have any idea whether he realized that when he was saying the things he was saying in 2016, that some of what people were hearing was about what I was just saying, like whether he realized it or not. What some people heard from that was, my kid won't necessarily have to move, right? I don't think people were like going down a spreadsheet of trade deals and, well, I think he's right about that. That seemed, I don't think that's what was happening. Right. And obviously, there's a bunch of other elements here that I don't want to gloss over that have to do with race and that sort of thing. But right now, we're just talking about this economic piece. And overall, the real deal or the promise that Donald Trump made was something like this. And I'll preface this by saying I got, in 2016, 220,000 or so votes from folks who also voted for him, even though the only thing we agreed on is we're both afraid of sharks. He's been very vocal about that, and that's the thing I agree with him. I don't like sharks.
You might also agree on fast food from some of the things that I've read.
He's not a Taco Bell guy.
Oh, he's not Taco Bell. He's more Kentucky Fried Chicken.
I don't know. See, we agree on like almost nothing.
We digress.
But so, I outperformed the presidential ticket by 16 points. So I had a lot of conversations with folks who were not in the group that I would say were like his base, but were persuaded, right? And what I think happened is you had him saying basically this. Basically, look, you don't like me, and you don't like the way I treat people, but it's made me very personally successful. Now, in some circles, people debate that, and I understand, but this is the narrative. And he says, and now I'm going to do that for the country and by proxy for you. And there were people who said, not like I'm jazzed about that, but they said, okay, I'm willing to give that a try. And so now what's happening is you see, like I talk to those people all the time. I went to high school with some of them. I hang out with a lot of them. And what they'll say now is some version of, and you may have heard this from people, they'll say, well, I don't really like the tweeting, right? I don't like that at all. What they mean when you dig a little deeper is, I still don't like him. I still don't like the way he treats people. And he never made the transition from being the leader of the Trump organization or the Trump brand to being the president of the United States. Everything he's indignant about, everything he's angry about has to do with him. And so to the extent, and I don't think that everything that we do in 2018 should be about him, but to the extent that you're drawing that distinction, it is important to say this is sort of the overall promise that he made to what he called the forgotten folks, or just to small towns and everybody else. And he's not keeping that promise. And it's not about individual policies.
Do they see that yet?
I think a lot of people do. And I think it's important that as we make our case for what we believe in, that we keep that in mind. Not that we lead by talking about him, we don't need to do that, but we keep in mind that it's important to say, look, he never started putting you first. It is all still about him. He is rude to everybody, and it's not for you, it's for him.
So I don't want to spend a lot of time really going into your political choices, but what's interesting about mayors right now is that from the 70s until 2000, 4 out of 5 people who became president of the United States have been governors.
Okay.
Since 2000, there are about 9 or 10 people who were governors who've run for president who haven't even been able to get nominated in their party, Democrat or Republican. I would say the bloom has come off the rose a little bit for governors, which is maybe helpful for Democrats because we don't have that many governors. So I'm maybe being a little rosy, but you do have some people who are the one executive office that we have a lot of are mayors, and I think what we're seeing with some of the mayors is an incredible amount of innovation. Steve Benjamin just sat here. I know Mayor Benjamin has been taking people, from mayors out to San Francisco to talk about tech and virtual reality, augmented reality, cybersecurity. Tony Harp from Connecticut has been talking about diversifying asset managers and using the mayor's office to make sure we can get more people of color and women into this sort of cloistered white male field. And then you've got Eric Garcetti in LA. And Garcetti has gotten multi-billion-dollar deal to do a multi-year infrastructure project and has talked about how he thinks when it comes to this question of race, which you have been willing to talk about, when it comes to this question of race, getting people to work on a common project is important. And then Mitch Landrieu from New Orleans, former mayor, who has really taken on race and has a great book out about being a white Southerner. I interviewed him a week ago. Check it out. But he has
We're plugging things. I have a book coming out.
August 7th. You have a book coming out. I was going to bring it up.
That was shameless. Oh my God.
It's good though. That's why we're here.
I'm getting better at it.
So why do you think, as we talk about opportunity, that it is important or it is scary and bad to also talk about some of the racial dynamics and gender dynamics that are happening in the country right now?
Oh, it's incredibly important. We have to talk about it.
Not everybody agrees with you. Some people think we shouldn't talk about anything having to do with race and gender.
Well, I mean, if you look back over our history, generally just not talking about stuff has really pushed us forward. No, that's terrible. No, I mean, look, and generally when people say, let's not talk about certain things, particularly when folks in politics say that. Now this is different than a conversation of what to emphasize, all right? So I want to be clear. But when it's let's not talk about certain things, that is usually coming from data-driven, political, whatever. And that's fine, and I'm not a strategist, I don't claim to be. But what I have found is that people will forgive you, and I'm talking voters of all kinds. Voters will forgive you for believing something that they don't also believe, as long as they know that you truly believe it, they can tell, and that you believe it because you care about them. And so, I had no problem invoking Black Lives Matter and talking about Black Lives Matter in any part of my state, right? Obviously, I don't think you get any points for talking about it in certain parts of the state, and I did that. But when people would bring up Ferguson and other parts of Missouri, I would say, look, Black Lives Matter means Black Lives Matter also. And it means that we care about people who are experiencing something like what folks are experiencing in that part of our state, just as if your kid, when they went outside the house, you felt fear for them, I would not stand for that either, right? And the thing is, people would kind of, not everybody, but a lot of people would say, okay, I see that that's not you saying, I care about this issue because these are my people. It's you saying, I care about this issue because every single person deserves to have an opportunity to succeed no matter where they live or no matter how they grew up. And I just think when you're passionate about something, passion is persuasive. So
you have a way of thinking about courage that comes from some of your history.
Sure. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit what you think about political courage.
I tend to, when I hear the term political courage invoked constantly, I tend to think we set a pretty low bar for it. I served in Afghanistan in the Army, and I tend to tell this story about this politician that I saw who was a newly elected member of the Afghan parliament. And the reason I met them is because I was part of a team that was escorting them because they needed protection from the Capitol in Kabul back to their home. And I've thought about that person a lot because it wasn't like a radical statement they made or some agenda they were pushing that put their life in danger. It was the fact that that it was a woman serving in the Afghan parliament. And I've just always harkened back to that when I've thought about a so-called tough decision, in politics, because she was getting up every day doing what she thought was right because she was risking so much to be there. She was just doing what she thought was right, is how I assumed to be the case. And that's always kind of been there for me in the front of my mind, and I feel like we have an awful lot of people in politics who the hardest thing they've ever done in their lives is the campaign that put them into office. And when that's the case, it maybe feels to them like the worst thing that could ever happen to them is losing their job. And that tends to be why we have folks who maybe don't take the risks necessary for us to advance.
So I've thought for a long time that what people are looking for.
Thanks.
I thought for a long time that what people are looking for from politicians, particularly from Democrats, is courage and vision.
Yeah.
Right? And particularly in the base wants to see courage. They want to know that you have the stones and the ovaries to stand up in front of a bunch of people and say what you think, even when it's not popular.
Yeah.
Right? And if you look at Bill Clinton back in 1992, who was a moderate, but who ran on moderate policies. It wasn't that he was mushy about it, he ran on moderate policies. Or Barack Obama, who went out and talked about important issues. Is there, what is the vision that you see for Democrats about how it is that they win in the next election?
I think it's about making every hometown a place where you can have success without having to move away if you don't want to. Yeah. And I think, to go to what you were talking about, courage and vision. Because
vision, just finish. Vision gets to the swinger voters who might be more inclined, who are thinking about other options. So the base is looking for courage. Swing voters, if they exist, are looking for vision.
I would argue that they go hand in hand, and here's why. Because we've had this thing happen where people act like there's this binary choice for Democrats to make, and it's this binary choice between talking to the base and trying to bring people back over who may have voted the other way. And the reason I think that that's not the case, I'm not sure that it ever was, but the reason I think it's not the case is a couple of reasons. One, I've never known anybody who won an argument by trying to convince somebody that they didn't disagree, right? Like, if you think about like your roommate or your spouse or whatever, you're not like, look, yes, I didn't do the dishes, but seriously, I'm right. Like, it doesn't work, right? It's, you did them or you didn't, and you have to believe in what you're saying, and that's the first part. And the second part is everybody's got a camera on their phone, and so if that ever worked, it certainly wouldn't now, because you can't go to one group and say one thing and go to another group and say another. So what I think happens instead is if you are talking to folks who agree with you on everything and you say what you believe and they agree with you, that's great. When you go and you're talking to somebody you're trying to convince, you don't change what you believe, you try and convince people. That's how you win an argument. Now the thing is, that doesn't mean, like, you keep your policy the same, you keep your values the same, but what you don't have to do is say it in the exact same way, because if you're trying to relate it to somebody else. So, to give you an example, when I ran in Missouri, I would be, like in Kansas City at maybe a Planned Parenthood event, and perhaps I would be talking about equal pay. And I would talk about the importance of equal pay for equal work. And then if I'm 2 hours away, like later in that day, and 60 miles away in a rural area, 100 miles away, and I'm in a room full of middle-class men, I'm still going to talk about equal pay for equal work, and I'm not going to change what I believe, but I want to convince them. So I'm probably going to say something like, and I've done this many times, if your wife is going to her job and she's getting paid less than a man at that workplace who's doing the exact same job, you both have less money to send your kid to college. Both of you are not going to be able to afford to go on a vacation this year. I didn't change what I believe. I didn't change my policy, but I made sure that they understand that I care about the issue because I care about the people I was with 2 hours ago, but also because I care about them, because it affects them too. And so my point is, I don't think that binary choice is real. I think you have a vision, you stick to it. And by the way, these folks have a camera phone and it's going up, and these folks over here are going to see that you said that, and they're going to appreciate it and respect you, and they're going to be more likely to want to knock on doors for you. And these folks over here, you are not going to win them all over, but you're going to win some of them over. Because if you came in and you said, no, I don't believe in all that stuff over here, you're not a good actor. It's why you're in politics not acting, and they're not going to believe you anyway, and you don't get any credit for it.
So with Let America Vote, you travel to, what, 38, 39 states?
A bunch of states.
A bunch of states all over the country, right? So you're talking about voting rights. Is there anything that you saw, anyone you talked to in the course of those travels that changed your mind or taught you something that you didn't expect?
Sure, like every day, you know. I think the biggest...
On what?
I don't know if it changed my mind. Sometimes it reaffirms. Sometimes really what it does is it colors in what you feel happening, and then you can it creates imagery for it. So, for example, I met a woman in Tennessee named Dawn, and it was like, I don't know, middle of 2017. And she picked me up from the airport, and she was taking me around a lot of events around Tennessee that day, and she appeared to me to just be like an ace #1 MVP volunteer for the Tennessee Democratic Party, and I figured Dawn had probably been that for at least a couple of decades, because every event we walked into, it was like, you remember when Norm would walk into Cheers, but it was like, Dawn, everybody knew Dawn. And so I was impressed by that, and at the end of the day, as she was dropping me off at the airport and I was going home to Kansas City, I asked her, I said, Dawn, by the way, how many years have you been volunteering with the Tennessee Democratic Party? She said, honey, years? She said, I started volunteering on January 20th, 2017. and I saw so much of that. I have a million stories like that, and what that colored in for me is that the movement that's happening in the country right now, the Republicans are in power, but we have the momentum, and what's behind that is not some politician on TV that's dragging people out. They're not flipping on, they're not seeing me in a box on MSNBC or CNN or whatever and going,
Chuck Schumer, man. Chuck Schumer is moving people every day.
But the thing is, it's no politician. it's not that. It's what it is it's somebody like Dawn who's calling their neighbor and saying, hey, like back during the Trump care debate, saying like, I know our congressional district is super red, but we're going to this town hall and we're going to demand answers. Do you want to go with us? And that's sort of the gateway to it. And so it's regular folks, it's people bringing their neighbors into the fight. And the reason that makes me so incredibly optimistic is because if you think back at the most effective movements in the history of the country, they've always been the ones that started outside of Washington and went to Washington, rather than the ones that started there and tried to go out. And that's what I think is happening right now.
So my wife likes to say very often that Donald Trump is the least patriotic president that she's ever seen.
I think, yeah.
And if patriotism is love of country, who knows? So what did being in Afghanistan teach you about patriotism?
Well, a lot. I think...
Does any of it have anything to do with a guy named Salam?
Yeah, I appreciate the prompt. Yeah, I will tell that story. Thanks. Before I do, let me preface it to say that I grew up comfortably, and there was nobody in office who could take food off my family's table or deny us something by a politically driven decision. I was really fortunate. And so the very first time in my life that I'd ever been on the receiving end of bad decisions that were driven by politics, I was in the backseat of a vehicle that had no armor. But the thing is, that's not a hard luck story. That is a story about somebody who got to live outside the wake of politics and politicians until my mid-20s. And part of the reason, for instance, that I want to be the mayor of my hometown is there's so many people in my hometown for whom that feeling of being let down, that's among their earliest memories. And I feel an obligation to that. And so, yeah, to get into the story you mentioned, we're not as far apart as we think we are. Where, if you watch cable news or if you look at social media, it accentuates our differences, but that's not really the case. And so I did learn a lot about that over there. When I was in intelligence school, one of the translators pulled me aside and he gave me some advice, or no, not one of the translators, one of the instructors, pulled me aside and gave me some advice, one Jewish soldier to another. He said, look, when you get over there, don't let your translator find out that you're Jewish, because he won't want to work with you. And I didn't know any better, so I took that advice. And so I get to Afghanistan, and I'm paired up with this guy named Salam. It turned out Salam's, he considered his hometown to be Kansas City. He had family there, just total coincidence. And so we're spending a lot of time together in some dangerous places, around some shady characters. We became really close. I would ask him all sorts of questions about Islam, and he would answer, and never ask me about my religion, because he never asked, and I never told him, because they told me not to. And then right before I was getting ready to go home, I wanted to tell Salam that I was Jewish. And so we're sitting there eating leftovers at his safe house, and so I make kind of a big production of it, and I tell him I'm Jewish, and he looks at me, kind of funny, and he's like, "Did you think I didn't know that?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, man, I never told you." And he said, "I said, he goes, well, back home in Kansas City, my sister cuts your grandmother's hair," and so we had like a good laugh like that about it. And then he got a little more serious, and he looked at me, and he was kind of hurt, and he said, "Did you think I would care?" And I was embarrassed, but I told him the story about intelligence school, and then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Jason, over here, we're just a couple of Americans that the bad guys would very much like to kill." And so I think about that all the time. And I particularly think about that now when you have a president who is trying to define patriotism as whether or not you can make everybody stand and salute the flag. And I think one of the things that I learned in the service is that patriotism is actually about making this a country where everybody wants to stand and salute the flag. And that's what I think we're all working to do every day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for your service. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.